This morning we've got Karen Jones about to speak to us. Karen is a Senior Research Fellow at the Personal Social Services Research Unit at the University of Kent. She's been involved in most of the key evaluations that have been done around individualised budgets, personalisation, and their impact on care recipients and carers in England over that time. And we asked her to come and present to us not only about the insights from those evaluations, but also to share with us just a helicopter overview of the context of social care and personal health budgets in the UK. I made Karen come out here on a flying trip, and she arrived after a 30-hour flight. I think she's still waking up at 3:30 every morning. Is that right? Yes, she is. And I think you got like a day off or something. And then, we took Karen to Canberra, where she did roundtables with the NDIA, with some of the national peaks, NDIS and Carers Australia and Alzheimer's Australia and Aged and Community Services and others, and one with the Department of Social Services, and Karen was there for that. And then I got her back to Sydney after Qantas helped by breaking down the plane, and then we did it all again the next day. So by the end of Wednesday, Karen wasn't speaking to me. What I did, because I got to watch Karen present on that stuff, it's an amazing effort to try and distill down in a short presentation all of the expertise and insight she's got from those evaluations over a couple of years, plus the addition. We talk a lot about what's going on in the UK. It's very hard when you live this far away to get a kind of clear picture that's salient to our concerns around primary care recipients, carers, service systems that go across disability, aged care, mental health system. And Karen managed to do that, and we're very grateful for it. Please welcome Karen.
Firstly, what a warm welcome I've actually received during the conference, and also actually visiting and actually talking about personalisation. When I first got the invite from Chris, I thought, fantastic! What a fantastic opportunity to go to Australia. I've always wanted to come to Australia, but the 23-hour flight slightly put a barrier in the way. I thought, no, I am actually going to come and talk to you about personalisation, what's going on in England, because personalisation is at the centre of a number of policies in England. After that thought, I had a second thought. Chris has asked me to talk about personalisation in England in half an hour. Do you realise how big that subject is? So I may go over time and eat into time allocated for questions. I am going to be around for the rest of the day. I'll be happy to answer questions. I have actually brought business cards with me, so I'm happy to receive emails after the conference, because personalisation, I've been working on personalisations since 2005. So it is a key interest of mine, so I'd be happy to answer questions following the conference. Within this presentation, I am going to be mentioning the word that seems to nobody's allowed to mention here, respite. I was actually questioned during one of the round tables about respite. And respite in England, people actually talk about respite, carers talk about respite. But there are other, when you actually look within personalisation, there are other terms that refer to taking a break for the carer, but also for the care recipient. Sometimes the care recipient actually wants to take a break from the carer, and that's allowed within the personalisation agenda. Other terms that refer to respite within the personalisation world, short-term breaks, leisure activities, gardening, spa days, which I'll come on to later in the presentation. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. I will briefly describe the social and healthcare system in England and the personalisation agenda. I will go on to talk about 3 evaluations that I've been involved in that looks at the impact of providing greater choice and control for the care recipient and the carer on their quality of life, their perceived health, their daily living. And we have learnt a number of lessons throughout this process, which one of the reasons I was very enthusiastic about coming to Australia is to actually share those lessons with you. We have gone on a journey for a number of years, and a number of lessons have been learnt. And then finally, it's what happened after the evidence. The Department of Health in England are very keen to commission national evaluations to actually explore whether new policies in social care and healthcare, whether they actually work before rolling that initiative out. And finally, what next for personalisation? So in terms of social care, this is personal care and practical support for adults, as well as support for the carer. The majority of local authorities provide care for people who are categorised as either critical or substantial levels of need using the Fair Access to Care services. Now, as budgets get squeezed because of the financial climate, it is very difficult. The criteria is restricted. It is very difficult to become eligible for publicly funded care. Social care is also means tested in England. So publicly funded care for individuals with assets of below £23,500 will only be eligible for receiving care, which actually means that we have a large self-funder market in England, but also we have a large and substantial informal carer population. And a number of policies have actually focused on how to support the informal carer, because without their help, I'm not sure where the system would actually be. So currently around 1.2 million people are receiving services. So in terms of healthcare, totally different system. This is free at the point of contact in England. It's based on clinical need, not ability to pay. There are charges associated with healthcare in terms of eye tests, dental care and prescriptions. And we do have a private healthcare system and complementary treatments are available for those wishing to pay for them. So moving back to the informal carer population, it's estimated around 1 million people provide unpaid care for more than 50 hours per week. I would say this estimate has actually now increased, because it was the Carers UK in 2011 that provides that estimate. It would have actually increased over the last couple of years. There are a number of policy developments that have helped shape services for carers. For example, Carer Strategy 2008, which was revised in 2010, £400 million was ring-fenced over 4 years to provide breaks for carers. The focus of the strategy was to support carers to remain healthy so they'd be able to provide that care. And also personalised support for the carer. Put carers at the centre of decisions. They know what they want. They know what supports they they want to be able to continue to provide that care. And the Care Act in 2014 strengthens the right and recognition of carers in social care, and it's a clear right to receive services. So moving on to the personalisation agenda in England, this is not about new money, this is about using existing money more effectively. It's about thinking about support differently. This is not money in addition to what you would have received in the traditional way of receiving services. It's about putting care recipients and carers at the centre of all decisions about their support. It's about giving more choice and control over how needs are met. There are three important policies that underlie the personalisation agenda. We have direct payments and personal budgets in social care. Personalisation has recently moved into the healthcare system in terms of personal health budgets. So we'll begin by exploring the direct payments. This is a cash payment for individuals eligible for social care services in England. It was first introduced in 1997 under the Community Care Direct Payments Act, which gave the local authority power rather than duty to make payments to working age disabled adults. Now, following this act, a number of extensions were made to include older people, parents of disabled children and carers. And in 2003, the power of local authorities turned into a duty to provide direct payments to those who wanted one. And in 2009, this was extended to people appointed to receive a direct payment on behalf of individuals, for example, those who lack mental capacity. So for the care recipient, direct payments usually purchase personal and domestic support, including short-term respite in care homes, which have to be agreed in a care plan. There are a number of services that's not included. For example, direct payments cannot fund long-term residential care. Currently, at the moment in England, there's an evaluation, national evaluation that's being carried out to explore whether direct payments should be funding long-term residential care. So currently you can't. In a couple of years, who knows? Also, direct payments cannot be used to employ relatives living in the same household, so carers living in the same household as the care recipients. But there are exceptions to the rules, and there's a lot of there will be variation between local authorities on when they will allow a direct payment to be used to pay for care from somebody living in the same household as the care recipients. We also have direct payments for carers. This is where individuals are assessed as needing services because they provide a substantial amount of care to someone aged 18 and over. The aim is to support the well-being and health of carers. For example, domestic help, equipment that would have been provided by the local authority, college courses, sitting service to provide respite. Around 350,000 carers receive services, of which approximately 110,000 receive some kind of self-directed support. It's estimated that around 70,000 carers currently receive a direct payment, but provisional estimates indicate the number has risen to around 80,000. So moving on to personal budgets, in social care, this very much built on direct payments. They were first proposed in 2005 as individual budgets. And the main difference between individual budgets and personal budgets solely social care funding. Individual budgets, when they were first proposed, the aim was to actually include a number of different funding streams into the budget. For example, supporting people funds, access to work, disabled facilities grants. During the national evaluation, which I'll come on to, it was found it was very difficult to pull all those funding streams into a budget. Each funding stream quite often had their own assessments, had their own rules around the funding streams. So one of the main messages that we provided to the Department of Health is that it's very difficult to actually combine, even though the aim was to combine all the funding streams into one budget. It would be fantastic if people only had one assessment, because people do not like being asked the same the same questions. How many times do people have to be asked the same demographic information? But we found it just didn't work. So, which is why personal budgets have actually been rolled out. In terms of the difference between direct payments and personal budgets, people should know the level of the budget before the support planning process begins. So after assessment, care recipients and carers should know the level of the budget. There should be greater flexibility on how it is used. People should be offered a choice in how they would like their budget to be managed, by a direct payment, but also some people do not want to take on the role of the employer. They actually want, even though they want to be put at the centre of all decisions, they want somebody else to take on that management of budgets. So in addition to direct payments, people could opt for a managed budget. So basically the local authority manages the budget on behalf of the budget holder, but the budget holder and carer are always put at the centre of all decisions. Personalisation has moved into the healthcare system following the experience of social care. This was first proposed in 2008 as a way of meeting health and wellbeing needs, and basically the same principles underlying personal budgets in social care. Basically just shifted this into personal health budgets, the same principles: greater choice and control, choice in deployment options, knowing the level of budget after assessments. Personal budgets, we do have personal budgets for carers. Carers can qualify for a personal budget in their own right in social care through a carer's assessment. And they could purchase support that carers are assessed as needing, including respite. But again, variation between local authorities, whether personal budgets is a one-off payment or whether it's a continuous payment. But personal budgets could be used to employ, for example, a gardener, relaxation treatments, funding for a hobby, equipment to help with the caring role. So a lot of flexibility in what a budget can actually could be used for. In terms of personal health budgets, the support for the carer is calculated within the care recipient budgets. And personal health budgets cannot be used to pay informal carers living in the same household. This is the current situation. I would say is personalisation in the healthcare system seems to have mirrored what happens in social care. So in a couple of years, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a personal health budget for carers. So what is the process? The process is exactly the same for social care and healthcare. You start off with an assessment. Budget holders should know the level of the budget following the assessment, which is really important. It's a very important piece of information, particularly as you're encouraged to develop a support plan. You're encouraged to explore what supports you would like to meet your needs, health and social care needs. I always, all this week I've been talking about buying a car. If you don't know the transparent budget and you're looking at the market to buy a car, you really want an Audi. However, in the budget, you only got enough for a second-hand Fiesta. So it's an important element of the process to actually know what budget you're actually working with. While people are encouraged to be involved in the support planning process, the plan has to be agreed by someone within the local authority or within the health authority. And quite often, the larger the budget, it would go to a panel, but smaller budgets, it may get signed off by one person. So even though you've got flexibility in actually developing a support plan, it does need to be signed off and approved at the end of this process. And so you arrange the support, and then it's actually reviewed. Within the pilot program, it probably was reviewed every 3 months or so, just to make sure, because everybody was learning, because it's a new policy in social care and health. Normally it's a yearly review, just to make sure that the services are, the appropriate services are being purchased and the budget's actually sufficient to cover the needs. So respite, moving on to respite care and provision, the traditional service-led approach, daycare services, paid carers to come into the family home, residential respite care. When we look at the personalised support, you can see you've still got the daycare services, you've still got paid carers to come into the family home, you've still got residential respite care, but it's about the choice. People can still choose those traditional services, but they have the choice and flexibility to actually decide who actually comes in to your family home, to sometimes do very personalised care, that you have the choice to decide who actually comes in. The traditional approach, quite often, you don't know who's actually turning up. Quite often, if it's a big package of care and it's 24 and there's a carer for 24 hours, then quite often you don't have the control of changeover times. Now, throughout the evaluations, we talk to the budget holders, we talk to the carers, and there's one example that a mother of a son that's severely disabled, he has 24-hour care, and she was saying that the traditional system, they had to be home by 3 o'clock in the afternoon every single day for the changeover. So it was actually, the changeover was determining what they did during that day, because they had to be home at 3 o'clock, a new set of carers came along. Now, the changeover could be at 3 o'clock, it could be at 2 o'clock, it could be at 5 o'clock. It's about making sure that everybody, the family, the care recipient, the carer is involved in the decision making, putting them at the centre of all decisions. And so now they have total flexibility, they can take their son out, and they know that they don't have to keep watching the clock to make sure that they're going to be home on time. Other examples of respite, breaks away with or without the care recipients. Sometimes the care recipient wants to have a break from the carer. Sometimes the carer wants a break from the care recipient. Payment for a support worker to go on holiday with the family. So it gives both the care recipient and the carer respite while on holiday. Leisure activities, gym memberships, spa days for the carer, perhaps. All examples of taking a break. Quite often there's there's a shock that a budget can actually purchase a spa day. Really, you can purchase a spa day from a personal budget or personal health budget. If you actually look at how much daycare services actually cost, and sometimes people don't want a daycare service, particularly younger people with a physical disability, for example, they don't want to go into a daycare service, and it costs huge amounts. In comparison, the cost of a spa day or a leisure activity, going swimming, is a fraction of the price. And other example is college courses for both care recipient and carer. So I'm just checking time. Sorry. So in terms of the evaluation of individual budgets, there were 13 local pilot sites. There was a randomised controlled trial that's sat at the heart of the evaluation. So people were either randomised into the individual budget group, they were offered a budget, or they were randomised into the control group, and for the duration of the evaluation they received conventional service delivery, but it was made very clear that we were not denying anybody a budget. We were saying there's a delay. For anybody who was in the control group, there was just a delay in, if they wanted an individual budget or personal budget, there was a delay in actually being offered one. And quite often, people, organisational representatives within the pilot sites, they were saying, if you actually wait, this is all new. This initiative is very new to the organisation, with the massive changes within the organisation to actually be more personalised. If you actually wait for a year, you may actually get a better process and better journey through the individual budgets. It may actually be quicker because the support plan may take a shorter time once everybody has actually done that learning. So 959 care recipients participated in the evaluation, 510 in the individual budget group and 449 in the control group. One of the aims of the evaluation was to explore overall, did individual budgets actually work in terms of outcomes, costs and cost effectiveness, but we also wanted to look at, did they work better or worse for some groups of people. So we wanted to, we looked at 4 user groups: people with physical disability, older people, people with a learning disability, and people using mental health services. In terms of the research team, a number of universities were involved, and we all brought our expertise to the evaluation. So, for example, the Social Policy Research Unit at the University of York, which included Caroline Glendinning, very much led on the qualitative aspect of the evaluation, while Personal Social Services Research Unit at the University of Kent and LSE very much, we love a huge data set, we love numbers, we like to put, the bigger the data set, the happier we are. But you can't just have a big data set, it's the qualitative case studies that actually make the quantitative results come alive. So in terms of the data collection, we had qualitative data collection, so in-depth interviews with budget holders, carers, number of organisational representatives. So we wanted to explore the process, the overall process within the system, and also for people receiving budgets and also the carers. In terms of the quantitative data collection, we collected baseline data, this is before the individual budget process actually began, and the current support arrangements, and then we invited people to take part in an interview, an outcome interview at 6 months after consent, which looked at social care, quality of life, a single item measuring quality of life, psychological health, and also health and social care service use. One of the aims of the evaluation was to explore whether individual budgets had an impact on service use between baseline and at 6 months. And we also explored in great detail the support plans for individual budgets. So the support plans were actually looked at the overall level of the budget, the services that were being purchased, the funding, the deployment options that people actually decided to manage the budget, because there were 3 deployment options, but they could be a combination. It could be certain support services they wanted to manage as an individual budget, but the rest they wanted to have it managed by the local authority. On average, we found around £11,000 per year was included in the individual budgets. So what did we find? Overall, individual budgets had reported better social care outcomes and high perceived levels of control compared to those in the conventional service delivery. So fantastic. Overall, perfect. One process fits all. But that's not one of the aims of the evaluation. We wanted to know overall the positive results, but what happened when we looked at the samples, the different groups of people in the evaluation. So for people using mental health services, the individual budget group reported higher perceived quality of life. Now, that result came from the quantitative big data set, all numbers. We want to look at the qualitative data as well to try and explain why we got that positive result. And people in the individual budget group were saying that individual budgets were giving them the opportunity to access more appropriate support. And so you could begin to actually explore why we actually got the positive quantitative result. People within the physical disability cohort, individual budgets, the individual budget group reported high quality of care, and they were more satisfied with the support that they actually received. Going back to the qualitative data, there seems to be a view that individual budgets gave people the opportunity to build better quality support networks. Older people, we actually found that older people in the individual budget group reported lower psychological well-being compared to people in the control group. And like we did for the positive results, so why is that? What is happening within the older person group? So going back to the qualitative results, older people actually thought that the whole process was an additional burden of planning and managing the support. Now, this is within the pilot programme. And there was a view that they didn't actually want to have, they didn't want to take on the view, the role of the employer. They didn't want to have that responsibility. And when we looked at the deployment options that typically were being offered, within the pilot programme, there were a number of direct payments being offered. And so we were thinking, older people, sometimes they don't want to take on the role of the employer. There was a high percentage of individual direct payments being offered to actually manage the individual budget. So we were trying to build up a picture of why we got that negative result. But one of the key recommendations we took to the Department of Health is that perhaps it actually takes longer for older people, or some older people, to develop confidence to assume greater control. And so perhaps one side, when we actually found the overall positive results, when we could say one size fits all, perfect, wonderful, actually perhaps it doesn't. And you may need a different process depending on who you're actually talking to. And for people with a learning disability, people in the individual budget group, were more likely to feel in control of their daily life compared to those in the control group. Cost effectiveness, when it's a new policy, the key question that the government wants an answer to, is it cost effective? Were the outcomes worth the costs? And we did find some evidence that individual budgets were cost effective, particularly for people receiving mental health services and younger individuals with a physical disability. When we were looking at the impact of individual budgets on care recipients, a number of people in the research team were thinking, could the individual budgets within the pilot programme start having an impact on carers? Because within the policy, the focus was very much on the care recipient and not the carer. And so we went back to the Department of Health and said, we think that potentially giving care recipients greater choice and control actually would lead to an impact among carers. So we were commissioned to do a separate study to explore whether the impact and outcomes of individual budgets had an impact on unpaid relatives and other informal carers. The data collection, within the Ibsen study, the overall evaluation, we collected information on informal carers. And so 208 carers were invited to participate, of which 163 agreed to take part in the study. You may think the sample is very low. Carers are doing other things, other more important things than answering questions from a researcher. And so it's very difficult to actually get carers to take part in a study because they're busy. They're busy doing the caring role. But even though the sample is quite small, you can start seeing a trend. So what do we find? We did find a positive impact in terms of carers' quality of life and social care outcomes. So while the individual budget policy initially was very much focused on the care recipients, it actually had an impact on carers. And there were a number of aspects that contributed to that positive finding. Being satisfied with the support planning process. If the carer is satisfied with the support planning process, they're going to be happier with the whole arrangements. If they're actually asked their views of the planning process in addition to the care recipients. A good relationship with the person cared for, having a break with the person they cared for, a few hours spent caring. We have found no evidence of higher formal support costs among carers and no evidence of lower carer costs. So the semi-structured interviews suggested that positive effects were due to carers feeling more engaged with the process. So in addition to putting the care recipient at the centre of all decisions, you also need to put the carer in the same position. One of the interesting results we did find, looking at the individual budgets support plans, was more money was spent on short breaks among individual budget holders who had an informal carer. So more money was put into a budget for respite for the carers, possibly. So that was the individual budget and the individual budget evaluation, commonly known as Ibsen and Ibsen carers. We now move on to Phoebe. Go Phoebe. So Phoebe 1. This is evaluation of personal health budget pilot programme. So following what we found in the evaluation of individual budgets, we were commissioned to run an evaluation to explore the impact of personal health budgets. So this was a 3-year evaluation. Overall, 64 pilot sites were involved in the evaluation. 20 formed the in-depth evaluation, received £100,000 a year to support the pilot programme and also the evaluation, because we were asking pilot sites for a lot of data, and so they did actually get some money from the Department of Health to actually support that. So the overall aim of the evaluation, right at the beginning, this wasn't if personal health budgets were going to be rolled out. It was made very clear it's going to get rolled out, but your job was to tell us, the evaluation's job was to tell the Department of Health how it should be rolled out. So the main focus of the evaluation was to look at the implementation of personal health budgets, who actually, where there was a positive impact of personal health budgets, how personal health budgets should actually be implemented to provide good outcomes, and what support was required for individuals. So in terms of the research team, the University of Kent, we took the lead on the evaluation, but we also had help again from social policy research units. Once you have a good relationship with another research unit, we tend to actually bring the same research units back into a new evaluation. So obviously we had Caroline Glendinning and her colleagues, somebody from LSE and also from Imperial College London. Dominic King was our medical person. He was a medical doctor. When you're talking about health, and we were talking, possibly we'll be talking to GPs, we wanted somebody who actually knew what he was talking about. You know, when you're talking to GPs, you need a very straight answer for them. So Dominic King was our medical person. This was a control trial with a pragmatic design. So a number of sites had just one single set of health professionals recruiting recruited people to the personal health budget group and to the control group. So anybody who fell outside of their criteria of who should be off the personal health budget automatically went into the control group. We asked them to randomise to get rid of some of that selection bias, because it was decided right at the beginning a randomised controlled trial was not appropriate because it was within the health service. We had to minimise the selection bias as much as possible. And we also had a group of pilot sites where they had one separate group of health professionals recruited to the personal health budget group and another recruited to the control group. They were not asked to randomise. The evaluation covered a number of health conditions, also people eligible for NHS continuing health care, so diabetes, mental health, COPD, stroke, long-term neurological conditions. But we were guided by what the pilot sites were saying on who they wanted to offer personal health budgets to during the pilot programme, rather than the evaluation dictating what health conditions were going to be the focus. So 1,000 people were recruited to the personal health budget group and 1,000 to the control group who received conventional service delivery. Again, we had a mixture of qualitative and quantitative data collections. So we interviewed a number of budget holders, carers, organisational representatives. The quantitative data collection, we looked at outcomes, so we invited people to take part in an interview at baseline and again at 12 months. And the reason why it was 12 months is that we learnt through the evaluation of individual budgets, 6 months isn't long enough to implement a new initiative properly. So quite often in the individual budget evaluation, we were interviewing when people hadn't gone through the support planning process or they'd only just received support. So we did, we took a lot of learning from the Ibsen study and put it into Phoebe. We also wanted to collect objective primary care service use from GPs and secondary care service use from a national database, the hospital episode statistics, to look at service use at 12 months before consent and 12 months after. So what did we find? We found positive results. Personal health budgets were associated with an improvement between baseline at 12 months and baseline, so they were improving at 12 months after receiving a personal health budget in terms of care-related quality of life and psychological well-being. How pilot sites actually implemented personal health budgets had an impact on outcomes. So budget holders knowing the level of resource before support plan had an impact on whether people had a positive outcome. Also flexibility and choice as to the services that could be purchased. In terms of budget size, if it's sufficient to start substituting services, it has a positive impact on outcomes. So right at the beginning, we had personal health budgets that were covering the whole of the care package, so £20,000, £30,000 for particularly for NHS continuing healthcare, which is basically a package that's solely funded by the NHS, down to a couple of £100. Okay, I'm rushing. The questions will be after this session, I think. And it's all Chris's fault because he wanted the whole personalisation. And so we had a huge range of budgets, but we actually found through the analysis that £1,000 seemed to be the cut-off, but that was actually making an impact on outcomes. And so one of the key recommendations for the Department of Health is that the budget needs to have a sufficient amount in the budget to start having an impact. But we didn't find, in effect, personal health budgets on health status or health quality of life. But would we? It was a 12-month follow-up period, so would we actually begin to start noticing a difference, particularly with health status, because a 12-month follow-up is quite a short space of time. And also personal health budgets were cost-effective, particularly for NHS continuing healthcare and for the mental health cohort. And implementation and budget size has an impact. I thought I was just going to be... Ron was going to tell me to shut up then. So, so in terms of, we wanted to look at carers as well. And again, the sample size is quite small, but we did find that carers providing assistance to a personal health budget holder reported better quality of life and perceived health, low instances of having their health affected by the caring role, and again reported satisfaction with the support planning process. This is one quote that illustrates the positive findings. It takes the pressure off me. I get a break, which will mean that I'm not tired all the time, and I think that's better for this person's son, as well as I'm not stressed out all the time. So it's a perfect quote to actually start explaining why we found a positive result. So lessons learnt, engagement right at the beginning of a new policy, and engage with people within the organisation, actually start answering questions. When it's a new policy, people within the organisation will have concerns and anxieties, and cultural change should be addressed right at the beginning of the implementation phase. Good implementation will lead to good outcomes. And one size doesn't fit all. The process needs to be personalised. It needs to take account of who you're talking to. So obviously the personal budgets has been rolled out. So from 2013, everybody eligible for publicly funded adult social care can have a personal budget. I'll just skip over the quotes, but all my slides will be available. So what next for personalisation? There's a Phoebe too. And while within the evaluation, we were able to explore and answer a number of questions. What happened after the pilot programme? What happened after that level of funding stopped within the pilot sites? So currently we are addressing the affordability of personal health budgets within the system, and scale of personalisation following the pilot programme. Because within the pilot programme there was block contracts really were not actually explored, so there's quite a lot of double running costs. So obviously that would actually impact on the affordability in the long term. Also the market development, how much of the market actually developed to be able to offer more personalised service. But if providers aren't offering a personalised service, does that actually have a knock-on effect for the workforce? So we're going to be exploring that in the next couple of years. and the continued impact on budget holders and carers. So we found a number of positive results. So what happened 2 years after the pilot programme, our personal health budget is still working and having a positive outcome. So 2016, we report back to the Department of Health. And finally, the next step for personalisation in England is integration. There are a number of programmes that have recently been announced. They want to integrate social and healthcare together. People don't want two separate budgets, one from social care and one from healthcare. They want one budget. They want one lot of decisions on how they're going to manage the budgets. So that's the aim within England, is to actually have integration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Wealth of material there. We're going to crave the indulgence of the next speakers just to take a couple of questions from the floor for Karen, because there's a lot of material there that we really want to absorb. Do we have a question from the floor in relation to Karen's presentation? Yes, sir.
Yes. Karen, you've used the term care recipients the entire time. Is there a discussion in England around that? Many of the focuses in Australia are away from care and towards education, towards socialisation, towards employment.
I think that there is a trend away from. We always used to call people who use services service users. I think that's a horrible term. There is a trend away from using service users. I think, and so care recipient is one phrase that we're using now in England. But there are other phrases. But I think it's definitely better than service users. I think that's a horrible term.
So language is very important,
Language,
isn't it?
yes.
A question here on the front row. Yes.
Thanks. Karen Sue Eldersham from Carers Australia. Closer. Okay. In Australia, we have a split between aged care, carer supports for people over the age of 65 and those for under 65. It sounds like that you've got around that with the personal budgets. So I was interested to know about that. But also, are conventional services in the UK split between the over and under 65s?
There is a split for conventional services, but I think personal budgets and personal health budgets actually start to bridge that divide. Because I think in England it's an overall package. There shouldn't be such a division, and it's all about giving the person, doesn't matter if they're old, over 65 or under 65, giving that person the same level of choice control for the support that they actually think they need. They're the best people to know what they need, and it's great that personalisation actually went into the healthcare system. To actually, even just because it's healthcare doesn't mean that somebody doesn't know what support they need. And so I think it does start bridging the gap. And the distinction, I don't think you do need to actually distinguish between older and younger. Just treat everybody the same.
Thanks, Karen. I think we might leave it there. Karen will be here for the rest of the day, and she has given us her email address, so the conversations can well continue. But please join with me again in thanking Karen for that great presentation. And I'm going to hand over again to Chris to introduce, thank you very much, our next speakers. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Karen. And, Karen has also got business cards here, which she's been very generous in handing out. So if people do want to follow up with her, she'll do that. Our next speakers are Rosemary Kayess and Cain Beckett. They're going to give us a consumer perspective on respite care in the NDIS. And I just want to say a few words about each. Rosemary is a Senior Research Fellow at the Social Policy Research Centre. You heard a little bit about the SPRC yesterday. Professor Kelly Johnston is leading a project which Rosemary is involved in at the SPRC. Rosemary's a human rights specialist and in particular a disability rights specialist. She was an expert on the Australian delegation negotiating the convention. She's an advocate for people with disability. She's been a ministerial policy advisor. I still haven't had time to ask her which ministers, but I will do that. And she's a good critical friend of National Respite and the work we're trying to do. And we're very grateful that she's come to talk today. So welcome to Rosemary. Cain is a director of PricewaterhouseCoopers, non-executive director formerly at the Cerebral Palsy Association. I read this morning, and I hadn't noticed this before, he's also an archer, which sounds kind of dangerous to me, but anyway, a dignity of risk. And he's also on the chair of the New South Wales Disability Council. He's a very successful management consultant, consultant in technology and management, and he's done that in Australia and overseas. And we're very grateful to have Cain here as well. So please welcome them both. Rosemary's going first.
You're right. Bring the house down. Good morning, everyone. It's a packed house, isn't it? Very impressive. I'll make my usual apology before I start. I will apologise now. I am a lawyer, and what's even worse, I'm an international human rights lawyer. So I do have a preponderancy to be a bit of a train spotter when it comes to international law. But what I want to speak to you about this morning is placing the individual experience in, the broader policy context in which we find ourselves today in Australia, which is very much changing around the way community support and personal services are delivered for people with disability, and more specifically the way that people with disability can access service provision. So what I want to do is just very briefly look at the international standards and how they've informed... Excuse me. Patricia, could you get me a glass of water, please? This is supposed to happen 3/4 of the way through speaking, not right at the very beginning. Oh, thanks, Chris. So, how it's informed the NDIS and current policy changes. And then I just want to explore what that means for what you guys all do on a daily basis. Can we have the first slide, please? So the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, this is a fundamental, it's a major legal and policy advance. It moves from a non-binding international standards to formally binding legal obligations for states which become parties to the Convention. Now what this means is that we've moved beyond the declarations of the early 70s that were very much wrapped up in protecting people from human rights violations within institutional settings, and moving to acknowledging people with disability as rights bearers, as recipients of rights rather than objects of welfare. And one of the fundamental shifts for the Convention is that it recognises disability as an integral part of human diversity. So what it is trying to do is give people with disability visible legal status. The Convention is intended to build on existing human rights standards and articulate what is specifically needed to ensure persons with disabilities enjoy those rights. So it's about acknowledging that all human rights are accorded to all humans because of our humanness. But what it does is it looks at the specific experience of disability and applies all human rights and fundamental freedoms to that context. Next slide, thanks. So I just pulled out a snapshot of some of the aspects of the Convention that inform the work that you guys do. So first and foremost, you must realise that international law, and this is where, being a lawyer, I will sort of wax lyrical a little bit, that they're all interrelated. You can't look at aspects of the Convention in isolation. They all interrelate with each other. But just pulling out little snippets of it, we can look to Article 19, living independently and being included in the community. So what it's trying to do is focus on the fact that people with disability should be living in the community as other members of the community, engaging and participating. So persons with disabilities have access to a range of in-residential and other community support services, including personal assistance necessary to support living and inclusion in the community and to prevent isolation or segregation from the community. So it's very much a move away from institutionalised options. Article 23, respect for the home and family. So confirming and respecting the right of people with disability to live within a home and within a family environment, especially children with disability. So states parties shall ensure that children with disabilities have equal rights with respect to family life, and states parties shall undertake to provide early and comprehensive information, services and support to children with disability and their families. Next slide, thanks. Participation in cultural life, recreation, leisure and sport. So it recognises that people with disabilities should have the right to leisure and sport activities and social activities, the same as their contemporaries and their peers, and that states parties should recognise the access barriers that people with disability experience in having those activities available to them, and should take steps and measures to reduce those barriers and open access for people with disability and to support them in that process. Next slide, thank you. And all these substantive articles are informed by what is one of the innovative elements of this particular human rights instrument. It's the first human rights instrument to incorporate a set of general interpretive principles. And if we look to the interpretive principles that drive the interpretation and analysis of the substantive provisions within CRPD, you can see that there are very core points that inform this process. So respect for the inherent dignity, individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's own choices and independence of persons. Full and effective participation and inclusion in society. Respect for the difference and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of human diversity and humanity. And respect for the evolving capacities of children with disability, and respect for the right of children with disabilities to preserve their identities. So it's these types of principles that inform the way that you look at those substantive articles. And if we think about the way service provision is provided, they're very informative about what the move towards the NDIS means. Next slide, thanks. So, the service system as we've experienced it, and I use we in the very personal sense, as part of the ratification of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the government which ratified the convention in 2008, put into motion the development of a national disability strategy to meet their obligations under this particular instrument. Part of the process around the implementation of the National Disability Strategy was for it to go out for public consultation. And that public consultation process received a massive response from the community. And the National Disability and Carers Advisory Council, it's changed its name so many times over my working life. I sort of struggle every now and then to make sure it's the correct.
Tony got rid of it.
Yeah, I know. Everybody gets rid of it, reforms it, gets rid of it, forms another one. And they all have different versions of the same words, basically, just in different order. I've just got to remember which order it goes in this time round. No, that wasn't a cynical little look then. And what the National Carers Council, whatever its formulation is, they decided to formulate the responses in a report and to examine the lived experience of the service system for people with disability. And I mean, overall, it said the system was broke in that it was, completely lack of adequate resourcing for the service system, and that it was broken. In other words, it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. It wasn't providing the services, and what services were being provided weren't what people with disability needed or wanted. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not a blanket insult to everybody, that there's some incredibly innovative service provision, but overall the system has been pretty broke over the years. This led to discussions by an entrepreneurial group, and they came up with the idea of a national disability insurance scheme. And then that proposal went through to the Productivity Commission, and the Productivity Commission did an inquiry into disability care and support. And lo and behold, they came up with the same sort of answers. The current disability support system is underfunded, unfair, fragmented and inefficient. That there's little choice and no certainty of access to appropriate supports. And this reflected what people with disability were experiencing. That basically they had to accommodate the service system rather than the service system accommodate their individual needs. And I suppose the greatest reflection of this is out-of-home respite. And when Chris asked me to talk about personal experience in terms of people with disability and respite, I thought, my God, I've never had to do respite. I've never experienced respite in my personal life. And then I thought, well, yes, I have, but I've experienced it from the other side of the coin. At one period in my life, I lived in a group home. And at that stage, that group home was seen as a quite sort of cutting-edge, specialist, small provision of service. And everybody thought it was the bee's knees. It was still an institution. Its size didn't make any difference. I mean, even though I used it a bit like a hotel, I was studying for the first part and then working full-time as well, and I came and went and stayed with my parents, and I went away, I travelled overseas. So even though I used it in that sense and it did meet my needs in lots of that respect, it was still there were still very institutionalised aspects about it. And once I purchased my own home and moved out, upon reflection, I could see how institutionalised I was. Many people would look at me from the outside and say, where do you get off saying that? You're professional woman, you're holding down a professional job. What do you mean you were institutionalised? And there were many aspects to my behaviour and the way my life was constructed that were institutionalised. But I didn't want to talk about me as such, but the people that I watched come in for out-of-home respite. And it was really intriguing to watch people with disability come in for respite and basically experience anything but respite. Their families were trudging across Sydney daily to visit them. They were putting up with carers that they had no choice in terms of who was showering them, a very intimate process. This whole concept that something as personal and as intimate as showering and dressing and grooming and being assisted to eat can be done by just anybody, for anybody, is, I think, really quite arrogant and rude. It is such an intimate process and such an intimate relationship that to think that you can just impose upon somebody, that person, it just beggars belief as far as I'm concerned. And so in the guise of respite, I was watching people get the illusion of some sort of break. The family was concerned that they were unhappy because they were in a situation that they didn't want to be in. They were trudging across Sydney to see them every day. And yet nobody seemed to think that that was the opposite of what a rest, a break should be about. Now, Chris lovingly introduced me as a critic of respite. And I suppose I'm not a critic so much as somebody that thinks this needs to be recognised as what it is. It is a balance of rights, of needs and rights. And I find it very difficult to see it as a carer issue in isolation. And yet, in lots of respects, whilst I see it as a disability issue, that if the disability supports, so the impairment supports of the person with the disability are recognised, there shouldn't be carer issues. And that I still believe that that is the central thesis, that that is the central objective, that once you have mechanisms in place that support the disability needs of the person with a disability, carers should just be in a functioning relationship with the person. There may be other issues that come up, but if they relate to the fact that that person has an impairment, it is still part of the disability issues. Can we have the next slide? So we have the NDIS. Now, the NDIS is supposed to be the great panacea of our time. It's going to change the world. We're all going to get up and walk. No, no, that's stem cells. My apologies. Different conference. Okay, the NDIS. Now, as a lawyer, there are aspects of that piece of legislation that scare the absolute bejesus out of me. But overall, I think I have a little bit of faith in the drivers of it. Unfortunately, I think the drivers for it are you people in this room and my colleagues with a disability, because of the experience of the last 20 years of a system that is unfair, unjust, underfunded, is going to drive something different. One of the great objectives of NDIS, though, as I say, there are elements in the legislation that I question how much this will be achievable, but I am known to be a bit of a black letter lawyer, so anyway. Voice, choice and control. It's about recognising that people with disabilities should have a voice in the services that they receive. They are the person receiving the services, and so they should have a say. They may need to be supported in being able to express their will and preference, and this is where I have problems with the legislation. But as I said, that's a technical thing, so we won't dwell on that too much. Choice. Choice has been one of the big problems with the service system, that it has been a one-size-fits-all. In fact, to the point where they think one carer fits all. And so choice is really, really important. There are questions around that too. Can a marketplace in, I think, a very problematic field be developed? I think it is difficult. And control. This is about what goes on in a person's life, sometimes very intimately, and their very personal relationships. They need to have control. If you don't have control about those very fundamental things in your life, about how your relationship with the intimate people around you, then you really haven't got control of much at all. And so if the service system is dictating those sorts of things, how can you feel as if you've got any control in any other aspect of your life? So these are the objectives, and they hope to obtain this through applying the traditional insurance framework of all reasonable and necessary supports. Now, this is supposed to be a facilitated process, and it's to utilise direct and individualised funding. So it's about placing the person with a disability and their intimate support networks at the centre of the decision-making process. So giving them the voice in how their services are provided, giving them a choice in the types of services that they receive, and having control in terms of dollars to decide what they purchase and what they don't purchase. So for me, the grand challenge for the NDIS is to meet these needs holistically. To avoid that temptation to isolate carers from people with disability, to isolate the service system from people with disability themselves. And I think that's incredibly important, that we recognise that the governance of service organisations needs to be informed by the disability voice. And it needs to be about informed choice. It's all right to say to people with disability, all right, it's all going to change. System's going to change. You'll be able to choose what supports you want. And those supports can be disability specific or they can be mainstream. So if you say that to a group, a person that's never had choice before, how are they going to know what they could choose? How are they going to figure out what's going to be available for them and what they would like to actually choose? Now, I remember after I broke my neck, I have a spinal cord injury, and they said, well, what do you want to do? I went, I don't know. I was studying to be a doctor, but I don't know. And so it becomes a process of looking at what the options are and making that an informed choice rather than just saying, what do you want? It needs to be able to help the person grow and understand as much as the service system needs to grow and understand this new context. Do people realise that with their individualised funds, they could probably just get the auto electrician round the corner to fix their wheelchair? I don't know whether people would know that's an option for them. I probably wouldn't have thought, I could get an auto electrician to fix my power wheelchair. But these are the types of simple things that could change the service provision for a person that's quite simple, yet may be beyond their knowledge. So it's about how the system informs people with disability so they've got the ability to actually exercise voice, choice and control. And about recognising, as Karen identified, that there's a plethora of ways in which people will decide that they are best supported. If it's a spa day every couple of months, sounds perfectly fine for me. If it's going to the footy on a Sunday afternoon with mates, that's as valid as well. So there's lots of ways that people can do things as long as they've got the information available to them to be able to make those decisions. Because without that knowledge and without ways to support people having access to that knowledge, voice, choice and control becomes a very hollow process. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to be here this morning. And I must say, it's with some trepidation that I follow Rosemary. I don't think enough people realise the impact that the people that were involved in negotiating the convention have had on people with disabilities globally, not just in Australia, and also not just for the NDIS. The New South Wales Disability Inclusion Act passed last month. That references the convention, and it was a deliberate renaming of the Disability Services Act because it's not about services. And so I think just we should all reflect gratefully on the work that went into that convention because it will make a big difference. I'm going to change the focus just a little bit. My sort of brief was also to give the consumer perspective, but also given that I am so heavily involved from a service provider and from a building the NDIS perspective, I'm also going to then shift a little bit and say, well, what does that mean for you and what do you need to worry about? Let's just move on. And also, I'll go pretty quickly because we are pressed for time. If anybody afterwards wants to follow up, I'll try and hang around for morning tea just a little bit. It might appear that I'm a little bit out of breath this morning. I actually have cracked a rib, so it's a little bit hard to breathe. It's not because I'm in any particular distress. Why am I here? And I guess I've got all of these hats on today, and so it's a little bit of a blending of all of them. Firstly, I lead PWC's disability practice, so my full-time role is building the NDIS. I'm the chair of the Disability Council, and so that's the government advisory body here in New South Wales. I must stress that my views this morning are not necessarily the views of the government. I'm fortunate enough to work heavily with Graham Innes at the moment, and I started my involvement in the sector with Cerebral Palsy Alliance. I think there are some of my colleagues here today somewhere. I'm sure I saw a few. I started as a motivational speaker for the Alliance, and somehow from that role I've ended up working in disability full-time. I'm not sure really how that happened. I've got at the bottom there, I'm a customer. I'm not yet an NDIS participant, but when I am, I'll have a full set. So we talk, what does the NDIS mean for your customers? I use customers deliberately. I love we use words like person-centred approaches and individualised planning. It's actually just we're your customers, and you might want to think about that. And then change a little bit around to look at what's coming and questions. So what does the NDIS mean for your customers? And I'm going to sort of take a little bit of a view. The simple way of describing what the NDIS is that it's customer-led care under a national insurance model representing 1% of Australia's GDP. So the underlined bits, I think, are the important bits. One, it's customer-led. We're in control now. You need to get used to that. Firstly, then it's an insurance model, and that means that we're taking a lifetime view of a person's support needs, and that when you enter the scheme, the lifetime cost of that person's needs and supports will be factored in. Why that's important is because it's an insurance model, and that means you get a choice of who you spend the money with, but not necessarily what money you get to spend. The insurance aspect is designed to reduce the long-term cost of care over time. And that's why governments like it. It's cheaper. So the NDIS will, over the long term, preferentially fund those things that make a difference. And so there's a little bit in there about having an evidence base, being able to demonstrate that the services that are being provided actually do something. And finally, the 1% of Australia's GDP, we're finally putting in the amount of funds that are needed. And it is a significant amount. The funding is doubling. That doesn't mean that I, as a person with a disability, are suddenly going to be raining cash. There was a perception in the media particularly that, oh, well, the NDIS is here, people with disabilities, we're set. And there was all sorts of discussion about whether we were going to cut back the disability support pension. The funding will basically mean that people will get a level of funding that is commensurate to their need, but less than half or just about half of the people on the scheme will be on $10,000 or less a year, while the people at the most severe end will be on somewhere around $230,000, $240,000 a year. So it's scaled. The little graph there is also a reminder that we are talking about 1 in 50 people in Australia being on the NDIS. And so the other 9 people with a disability, we're interested in what's going on there too, but we're not going to get any money. I don't think I will necessarily fit into the $280,000 a year category. But it is about all Australians. And part of the reason why people with disabilities are so heavily behind the NDIS is that we have a view that it might just be the start of some broader cultural change in the way we're treated in society. So the fact that some of us, in fact 9 out of 10 of us, are not going to receive any funds under the NDIS doesn't mean that we're any less behind it. I got death threats for wanting to go to school. When I was born, it wasn't illegal to discriminate. And I still get people looking at me when I walk with my children, wondering whether they're actually mine or whether I've stolen them from the nearest daycare. So part of the beauty of the NDIS, I think, is that we're moving the whole system, the whole sector, the whole approach out of a quiet little place over there that's funded by government, and it's now very much in the mainstream, and it's a $50 billion market, and we're all going to be in it. And if the NDIS is successful, then people with disabilities will be much more visible in the community, and that's going to lead to changes in the way all of you think, or rather all of the community thinks, over the long term. Trouble is, we're building that from a mess of underfunded, unfair and fragmented systems, and it is going to be painful. It's going to be really hard. We're only just 1 year in. If you're not in the trial site, you haven't really seen much yet, and trust me, it's going to be quite complex over the next couple of years. We have to, as a group of people that are committed to this change, we have to kind of remind everybody else out there, particularly in the media, that we're expecting a few teething problems, and that's okay. And so the beauty is that now under an NDIS, and for a person with a disability, this was what it means. Someone somewhere in government no longer decides how many times a person with a disability can have a shower each week. Someone said to me that for the first time in 67 years, someone is going to ask them what they want for breakfast. And that's the level of personal change that we're talking about. People having control of their own lives. It's not really that novel. We like to think we're a bit special in doing the NDIS in Australia. There's actually 11 of them running around the world. We're just kind of catching up a little bit. But it's about people with disabilities just having a say in their own life and not having things done to them instead of for them. So what does that really mean? And for you, what are the impacts going to be as people that are involved in service provision and looking after and caring for people with disabilities? Well, firstly, it's not just the specialist system anymore. The market is now completely open to anyone who thinks they can provide a service. I would suspect it'll take time and there'll be a bit of trepidation initially, but the impact of that is that your customers will go mainstream because we want to be part of society. And I'll have some data on that in a minute. Also, providers aren't going to be involved in the planning process. Unless I, as a person with a disability, want your involvement, you're not going to get to say how many services I have all year and who I get them from and what services I might need. That's not up to you. It means it's harder when you've got a job of planning what some of those supports are and how they might integrate. But providers don't automatically get the right to plan my life anymore as a person with a disability, and that's a big change, and a lot of people are still coming to grips with that. I, as a person with disability, may have expectations which conflict with your views as a provider. And remember the adage that the customer is always right. Because now if I don't like what I'm getting from my provider, I can move easily. And I know we talked about choice and how am I going to know what my choices are. There's some things happening that I'm pretty sure will support that, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go. I've also now got purchasing power and I can measure value. So when I'm receiving block-funded services and they're for free, I'm less likely to complain. I don't know how much they're costing. I'm just getting a service and I'm grateful for the services that are being provided. Now, I'm paying you $170,000 a year to look after me in full-time residential accommodation, and I know how much all of the different services cost and what I'm spending. The impact of that is also going to be that preferences change. So right now, for example, the Alliance, we provide a large amount of respite, and I can tell you that respite would be the single thing that if I went back to families and said, what do you need more of? They'd want to buy more respite. Once the family is in a position where they need to make a choice and I can say, well, actually, respite costs $500 a night. That's how much it costs. That's how much we've been spending all of these last 30 years that you've been receiving those services. And they'll go, oh, actually, that's interesting. I can get 10 hours of physio with that instead. So there'll be lots of changes in consumer preferences as people start to reevaluate what they're spending on. Number 5 there, I think, is the best one. You now need to worry about me as the customer rather than government. So in the old world, the health and well-being and viability of providers in the market was determined by how good you were at lobbying government for money. And if you did a good job, you got lots of funding and you could deliver lots of services. And there was a particular flurry around budget time when ADEC might have some extra money that they otherwise give back if they don't give it out. So we'd all rush around and get a little bit extra just before the budget closed. Now, actually, government won't care, at least at a state level. And indeed, in terms of how much funding you receive, government will have no influence over that whatsoever. It'll be how good you are at attracting customers. And so there's a beauty there that if you happen to provide a service that people want, and that's a good service and delivers value, well, now you can build as much of it and be as big of a provider as you like. There's no shackles anymore. You're competing in a business market the same as any other service provider in the economy. Can you deliver a good service that people want? That also then goes to the fact that the people that I interact with as a person with a disability in your organisation are now your salespeople. And in that sense, people that have respect for people with disabilities and have good people skills and good customer service, firstly, they're going to be worth their weight in gold. But you're going to have to think about culturally the fact that those people, in addition to being mission-based and being within the culture of the organisation that you serve, they're also going to have to sell if you want to survive. And so I can see a future, and for any of the employees that I'm responsible for that are here, please don't quote me, but I can see a future where organisations will pay more for people that have that ability. So are we going to be competing on price in employment? Absolutely. I get paid differently in my role depending on how good I am at my job. Why should it be any different for people that are delivering care in this market? I can see it happening. There also might mean that from a viability perspective, number 7, I might choose that I don't want to have all of my services delivered by one provider like I do at the moment. I might want a bit of variation and have a look and see what's out there. And so from that perspective, share of wallet and cash flow are going to be issues for you. And number 8, and there's a lot of stuff in the press and we're getting a little bit of feedback from overseas about this. I, as a person receiving services, don't care about your costs. It's about the value that I receive. And likewise, I don't care whether you make a profit. I don't have a need for disability service providers to be not-for-profit. And so am I, as a service user, going to go to for-profit providers if I think they're going to do a good job? Absolutely. So I am 100% sure that there will be for-profit entrants into the market. And in fact, I'm working with some of them right now. The question, though, is how are we going to manage the issues of market failure and service provision? And some of the safeguards that are needed because there is a imbalance of power. Just really quickly, I don't know if anyone saw these numbers yesterday. I wasn't here for the discussion with Bruce, but this is what the NDIS is currently being spent on. And first thing to notice, I'm only going to say 3 things. Firstly, we haven't spent that much. The scale down the side is millions, and the highest bucket there is 14 million. So all up, we've spent about 50 million so far on NDIS supports. The Alliance spends nearly double that each year ourselves. So in terms of the scale of the NDIS, we haven't really done that much yet. The other 2 things that I think are interesting are the biggest bucket there is daily tasks and shared living, and that's basically accommodation. So that's not really discretionary. The biggest discretionary bucket is the next one, which is community participation. So the most amount of money, indeed about 25% of the NDIS at the moment, is currently being spent on participating in the community. We just want to get out there and go to the beach, go to the pub with our friends. It's not about specialist supports. And the third bucket there is where I understand Respite falls, and that's the third largest. But you won't find the word Respite in the NDIS. So I think they talk about it as maintaining informal supports. It's about what do I as a person with a disability need in order to maintain those supports, not whether my family needs respite. So if you do a find on the NDIS website about Respite and look in their pricing lists, you won't see Respite as a line item, and that's because they call it something different. It's about maintaining informal supports. So really quickly, because I've got 5 minutes left, the point I made about the market and for-profit providers, we've had a little bit of a luxury in the sector for a while because it was separate and hidden and block funded and only for NGOs. Does anyone watch Recipe to Riches? Yeah. So you might have heard in the show this week, the market for baked goods in Australia, 216 million. And so that was a good market and lots of people were interested in that market. The market in Australia for under an NDIS for aids, appliance and home modifications is $1 billion. It's about the same size as the market for tea and coffee. This has been hidden and locked away from the rest of the economy for quite some time because of the way we've chosen to operate. Now we have a $22 billion market, 50 if you count most things, that hasn't really had anybody giving it a good competitive look for some time. So do I think for-profit providers are going to be interested in those numbers? Absolutely. The other thing to keep in mind, a lot of people were sticking in their heads in the sand because they thought it might go away, particularly before the budget. There was a little bit of worry about whether the federal government would change their views or not press forward. You won't ever hear politicians standing up and talking about this or in any great extent because it would be in bad taste. But the NDIS is the cheapest option that is available to governments at the moment to deliver these services. It's good policy. And in fact, if we were to keep going with the current model, the existing service system is between $9 and $30 billion a year more expensive than the NDIS once it's fully up and running. And the reason for that is the lifetime approach. I won't spend time on this slide. It is actually available online. I've given an economic view of the NDIS, but someone mentioned employment, so I just wanted to stop on it. Part of the benefits that we're chasing for the NDIS is what it will do to the lives and outcomes for people with disability. And the biggest one there is employment. If we are just as crap as the rest of the OECD, so not even really good, just average bad, that's worth $32 billion a year to Australia's GDP. So we are a long way behind best practice in terms of employment of people with disabilities, and the NDIS is part of going after that. The wave hasn't hit yet, but it's coming. We're only doing 10,000 people a year on the scheme at the moment. As of 2016, that goes to 140,000 people a year. So wait for it, it's coming. And there's lots of possibilities, and most of these we've talked about. Just in terms of the things that I'm working on at the moment to finish up, Yes, there's lots of focus on shared services and technology enablement to reduce the costs of NGOs, and I'm working with a number of them at the moment. There's also large for-profit organisations. Partnerships now between NGOs and private sector organisations. The need for a service menu not driven by government, we've talked about that. There are people looking at how do we commercially make providing a menu interesting. Think eBay for services, that sort of thing. Yep. And mergers and new operating models. A lot of the smaller providers at the moment are looking at merging and what happens to their footprint and so on and so on. But also individuals going out into the market on their own. I know of 2 allied health providers that have decided to just set up their own business because under an NDIS they're going to be able to operate more effectively that way. So I think there'll be a lot of opportunities for good carers, for example, or good providers to be a lot more agile and decentralised than they are at the moment. That's really all I had to say this morning. I will be around, if we've got some time for questions, but I will be around at morning tea for a little while, but please feel free to call or email if you have any questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Rosemary, and thanks very much, Cain. Both of you have given us some really interesting food for thought, and I think quite an optimistic view of the future and the change ahead. We've got time for just a couple of questions. We're going to be a little bit delayed over morning tea, but capitalising on the inputs that we've had from these 2 people is very important. Can we have a question or two either for Cain or for Rosemary on the basis of what we've heard? And we'll try and get a mic to you. We've got one way over in the far corner. While that's going, perhaps we've got one a bit closer. Question or comment? Okay, way over this side of the room, sorry.
Norman?
Yes.
I'll ask one quickly.
Okay, from Chris.
Cain, question for you. When you're thinking about that sort of agility of smaller providers, do you actually think there is a good potential for small, not-for-profit micro businesses, either of workers or consumers, people with disability, participants banding together to form little agile businesses effectively that are micro businesses?
Yeah, Rosemary and I are nodding. I actually think the opportunity there is better than under the current system for 2 reasons. One, the first reason is one of the things that I like is convenience of service. So if I can go to my small local provider rather than to someone who's across the other side of the city, fantastic, particularly for things that involve a strong relationship that I'll need. So, I even put physio in that bucket, yeah, absolutely. I think it's much more likely from a choice perspective, but I also think it's much more plausible now from a financial perspective, given that the size of the market is doubling. So as a small provider, you've got a much better chance now of being able to have a viable number of customers in the area that you're in.
I suppose, Chris, I would think that there's greater opportunity for that, small niche business activity, because the whole village concept, the larger you get, the more bureaucratised you get. And I think the response for people with disability is that they want people that understand their situation. They've been driven by bureaucracy for years. That's what they want to move away from.
So there's some real positive opportunity there, yeah?
Definitely.
Okay, question from across the room here.
Yeah, Glenda Pearce from Interchange Illawarra. I guess a take-home for me, obviously, and that underpins IDS is the stuff around not one size fits all. But I guess, and part of the thing is around that informal support and potentially a reimbursement for volunteers to just do ordinary things for you. And I guess one of the things that I understand about NDIS, it's based on worker support, and that model of the support that a person can get within their plan is based on a worker model. But when you said, Cain, one of the things that you might want in your plan is just to go to the pub with your mates. But if you have a significant disability or you have some additional needs that your mates might need to support you in, i.e. you don't drive yourself and you don't have, or you have a modified car that you want your mate to drive to your place to pick you up in your modified car to then take you to the pub, whilst I'm not suggesting your mate needs to be paid, but it might be nice, rather than you needing being over-serviced by having a support worker to do that, and the cost efficiency of that by your mate picking you up, it might be that you could put $50 on the bar. So do you think there's some capacity within NDIS rather than paying someone $50 or $60 for a Sunday evening, just putting $50 on the bar instead of $60 per hour, for 6 hours for the night?
Yeah, so...
Sorry about that, but
it might be unclear at the moment, and particularly given the approach that the NDIA is taking to the rollout at the moment and getting the scheme up and running. But that's absolutely the intent. In fact, if I want to pay my mate to drive, absolutely, that's the whole point. If I want to engage my neighbour to mow my lawn for me, great. We're doing some work in Queensland at the moment, actually, for rural and Indigenous communities where there isn't a great plethora of service providers to choose from in some of those remote communities. And part of the work is about, well, how do we unlock the latent capacity in the community to deliver services that other people in the community can deliver and actually pay them for those services. So I think the other confusion at the moment is that at the moment the NDIA is holding about 98% of the funds in terms of people's plans. People are not choosing yet, I think they will, to take those funds with them. One of the side effects of that is that if the NDIA is holding the money, you have to be registered with the NDIA to bill them. That's essentially the purpose of registering. But once that link is broken, once the NDIA is not holding the funds, you can spend it with whoever you like. They don't have to be registered with the NDIA.
Rosemary, do you want to comment?
Just getting back to the pub scenario, I mean, this is going to sound slightly strange, but my role when I go to the pub with my friends is that I'm the designated driver. So you might all sit there and think, shit, I'm not getting behind her in a car with her behind the wheel. But what I do, I mean, my role is that, okay, I supply the vehicle, I supply the driver, my paid carer picks us all up, drops us off and takes us home again. Or I meet them there, but we take them home. So sometimes home's a little bit of a roundabout trip and it's generally quite hilarious. But that's my role, that's my contribution for being able to spend time with my friends. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I really, really like my paid carers and I admire what they do. But, sometimes I just like to be with my friends and leave the carer somewhere else. Nothing personal, Patricia.
Different strokes for different...
Who's sitting up in the back of the room.
Okay. Thanks very much. I think that's a really good positive note on which to end this